January 16th, 2025, disaster struck the community of Moss Landing. What began as a single spark inside the world's largest lithium-ion battery facility erupted into a fire so toxic, so violent that firefighters couldn't put it out. The smoke carried chemicals no family should ever breathe. Parents grabbed their children as evacuations swept through neighborhoods. A state of emergency was declared. The fire burned for days. The contamination spread through air, soil, and water, and the truth is, we still don't know the full impact. Now, a year later, this site still isn't cleaned up. Residents are still reporting symptoms. Scientists are still warning that these massive battery facilities, built next to communities all across California, are unsafe, unstable, and in some cases, a ticking time bomb. Yet politicians continue approving them in spite of the protests. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on what happened in Moss Landing and what it means for every Californian living in the shadow of these BESS facilities.
This explosion changed lives in an instant, and the fallout is still unfolding. To learn more about what happened and why, stay with me for my conversation with scientist Michael Hogan, who breaks this down in a way every resident needs to hear. Today's guest is Dr. Michael Hogan, a Princeton and Stanford-trained physicist whose career spans the Apollo program, CIA satellite systems, and environmental research across 68 countries. He's authored more than 1,200 scientific publications and advised national leaders on climate and energy. He joins us today to break down the lithium battery plant explosion which happened in Moss Landing last year, what it means for residents, our environment, and why Californians need to pay very close attention to the growing number of lithium storage facilities planned across the state. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this because I know a lot of people in my area have been very, very concerned about what happened last year. And I also know that the cleanup isn't even close to being finished. So what can you tell me? I know you've been keeping close tabs on this. What can you tell me about the explosion? Kind of give us an idea how it happened and how dangerous these lithium battery plants actually are.
Well, the important thing about lithium-ion batteries, the chemistry of them is that they are designed to explode. That's what the lithium-ion battery does. And the reason that we know this is that we've had hundreds of explosions of lithium-ion batteries across the globe. We've actually had dozens of major plant explosions across the globe, everywhere from South Korea to California. In California, last year alone, in 2025, we had 8 different lithium-ion battery plants explode.
Wow.
So the magnitude and the frequency of these explosions is a testimonial to how the batteries are designed to function. They are designed to explode.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about some of the health aspects of what happens if you breathe in any of the air and some of the environmental concerns that people have had from the explosion in Moss Landing last year?
Well, the chief concerns are nickel and cobalt nanoparticles. And when I say nanoparticle, I mean a particle which is like 10 to 70 microns. Now this size particle is exactly the size that you need to enter the alveoli of the lungs. We have thousands of alveoli in our lungs, and that's where the work of the lungs gets done with the air exchange. And these fragments are not only the right size, but they're jagged because this was an explosion. And these jagged particles get lodged in people's lungs. So people who inhale this even for a day or two may have enough cobalt in their lungs to last for decades.
Wow.
Which is a carcinogenic material. And this is why, this is not an academic concern. This is why the deaths from 9/11, when we had the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center, most of the deaths occurred decades later. We had 3,000 deaths that day, but 30,000 deaths in the next 2 decades, and that's because people who were either firefighting or were in the building got enough intake material of these nanoparticles. And so that's the major concern for human health.
What about the environmental concerns? There's a lot of farming in the area of Moss Landing, Watsonville, that whole area has quite a bit of agriculture.
It's been a very rich farming area for berries and avocados chiefly. And what we know is that the cobalt in particular gets lodged in the soil. It will typically lodge in the upper 2 feet of soil, and it stays there for roughly a century. It doesn't wash out. And so it's a significant concern, not only because it's there and children and people might play with the soil, but also because cobalt is particularly easily uptaken by the very crops that are grown there.
Wow, sounds terrible. And I feel bad for the people who live near there. I don't think a lot of people understand what these battery facilities really are and what they're used for. Can you kind of explain a little bit about that?
Well, the purpose of a lithium-ion battery plant is to store intermittent energy. We all know that wind and solar are sources of energy, but they're highly intermittent. For example, with wind, the wind farms do not operate when the wind is below a certain velocity or above a certain velocity. So the net effect is that wind energy typically operates about 29% of the time. So the theory behind the battery plant, I'm not saying it's a good theory, the theory is to store solar and wind when they're producing so that it can be yielded into the grid at times that it can be used.
Okay. So why are they doing this, do you think, if they know that it's dangerous? Have they warned the community or anything about this? And I know that we have talked before about how a lot of the true dangers are kind of covered up and glossed over.
Well, I think our leaders in Sacramento really know what's going on. I met personally with Senator Laird, Assemblywoman Addis, Assemblywoman Pellerin from our districts. And we had a meeting in Moss Landing in the Central Coast about 1.5 years ago. And they were holding a hearing on the safety of offshore wind and of battery plants. And there were 20 of us who testified, all kinds of people, scientists, fishermen, the mayor of the city, a wide variety. 19 of the 20 people who testified were strongly negative about the viability and about the environmental concerns of the lithium-ion battery plants. And so all this was recorded, and at the end, the legislative leaders who were present said, "Thank you for your testimony. We heard what you had to say, but we plan to build these things."
Wow, that's incredible. So right now, do you think anything has changed since we had the big fire? I know that Senator Laird passed a bill to try to make it safer. I don't know that any of the things that they can do can actually ever make this safe enough to where it should be in any community where there's people living and people growing crops and stuff like that. What's your opinion on that?
Well, that particular bill is just lip gloss. It does nothing for safety. It encourages them to have faster response times. But as we know, when the firefighters respond, they're told to stand down. You cannot fight an explosive battery fire.
So you just have to wait for it to burn out by itself?
Well, that's what they do.
Okay. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the actual explosion. You were telling me that these explosions, one battery, I guess, exploded, which led to another and another and another. So explain a little bit about that.
Well, the initiation of a lithium-ion explosion is typically, if the battery is overcharged, nominally 85%, if it's overcharged, it's highly subject to exploding. But the funny thing is, it's also subject to exploding if it's undercharged, less than around 15%. So you might say these batteries are very touchy. They're also subject to explosion if there's any moisture at all that enters the environment. So
wow.
It takes very little for one to explode, and that's what happened in the Azores marine disaster when they were shipping 4,100 electric vehicles from Europe to North America.
And then when one explodes.
One exploded, the second exploded, and everyone on the ship exploded, and the ship sank and emitted a huge toxic plume and toxic pollution to the marine environment.
Do you have any idea where they are with cleanup on the Moss Landing one? I heard they're still going through a cleanup process and stuff like that.
I think it'd be more truthful to say they're thinking about how to clean up. There's been no material report on the quantity of materials moved. There's also concern, rightfully so, that there can be more toxification of the environment as the so-called cleanup proceeds. It's just that it's not as simple. They like to use the word cleanup, but the public should believe the word cleanup if something has been done.
Okay. And then I know that a lot of people are upset because they're planning on building many more of these. There is a map out, and you can go online and look at it, that shows you where all the lithium battery facilities are, and there's a ton of them in California. Southern California, I know, has been fighting this for a while. A lot of residents have put together political action groups and things like that to try to fight against more lithium battery plants. What do you think about all these plants popping up? Do you think this is going to continue? How dangerous is this really? I mean, is it inevitable that these are going to keep blowing up?
Well, I think you can bet on that. They will keep blowing up. There are many of our representatives in Sacramento who want to see this industry proceed. And there's not a good basis for it, either economically or environmentally. The amazing thing, it's probably one of the biggest experiments that's been done in the United States that exposes people to risk. It's large scale, it's exposing a lot of people to risk, and maybe there will be a time when this technology can work and be safe.
But now is
the time is not now.
All over California, residents are protesting these battery sites, but the projects keep moving forward anyway, and it's not an accident. In 2022, the California State Assembly passed AB 205, which created a fast-track pipeline that lets developers bypass local communities entirely. AB 205 gave Sacramento the power to rubber stamp these facilities at lightning speed. And then there's the money. California's push toward 100% clean energy by 2045 has unleashed tens of billions of dollars in subsidies, grants, tax credits, and guaranteed utility contracts for companies building solar farms, wind projects, and especially lithium battery storage facilities. California's clean energy ecosystem is being supported by tens of billions of public dollars, with ratepayers ultimately footing the bill. So why do you think the people in charge in Sacramento are doing this? Is there money?
Well, the big problem is that the money trail is somewhat opaque. We know there's a lot of money at stake. We know for the Moss Landing plant, $1.5 billion was given of taxpayer money was given to the private developers.
Now, is that money making its way back to the politicians in the form of campaign donations from political action committees or anything like that?
We know that there are donations. The whole money trail, though, is not resolved because much of it goes through PACs.
Yeah.
So very few people have been able to rationally delve into the exact amount of money flow. But as with most things, we think money is a part of this.
Yeah, that's too bad. So I encourage anybody who is watching this podcast or listening, we need to be aware of what's going on. We need to hold our politicians accountable to what they're doing. This is a complete health hazard. It is a tragedy and disaster what has happened here in Santa Cruz County and in Monterey County. And those are the two counties up here that are affected by it, but there are many more in Southern California, and we really need to fight back on this. I thank you so much for being willing to share your knowledge and information and try to open people's eyes to what's really going on. If you could give us any advice, what would you do if you were living near or living in an area where you knew they had one of these lithium battery plants? Would you move, or would you How would you handle that? Do you think it's that unsafe where you want to get out of any area that has these?
Well, I'm a stay and fight guy, so I probably wouldn't be moved, but there's a great deal of concern for anybody who especially owns agricultural land or who owns land where children will be playing. It's something that we should really get a lot more information out to the public. The amount of information that's been released to the public on the chemical contamination has been eerily scant.
Yeah.
It was 10 months before the first report was released. In my research career, I ran a large laboratory where we did testing of soil contamination. And when we were called to do a test, we would go out in the field immediately. We'd have written results in 48 hours.
Yes.
So why they would take 10 months to deliver a report that's very deficient, very lacking in detail.
Well, I think one of the another question I want to ask you is there a safe way to dispose of or store lithium batteries?
Well, the short answer is there is not. These batteries are not economically recyclable. So while there's a claim that they're trying to learn how to recycle the batteries, the fact is that over 90% of all these batteries just get shipped to a poor country like Bangladesh, where they're disposed of in open pit landfills. And so we don't have an intact routine methodology for disposing. And we certainly, as seen by the Moss Landing and other 7 plants that exploded last year in California and 30 around the world, they're not safe.
Yeah, and it's really unbelievable that we had 8 battery plant explosions last year, and I didn't hear about really any of them except for the Moss Landing one. So this is not being widely reported by the local media or by the national media. It's pretty much being swept under the rug right now, and that's really too bad.
Well, I commend you, Carol, for your investigative journalism and trying to get involved and trying to inform the public. It's very, very significant what you're doing.
Do you think we're winning right now? Because I know a lot of people are speaking up, and there are big Facebook pages with thousands of members and people fighting against this. Do you think it's making a difference?
Well, most of the colleagues I work with are scientists, physicists all over the country. We have several dozen of us who are actively publishing papers on this subject, including offshore wind itself, to get the real facts in front of the public. And I will also say that the present administration has been given these documents. We've written dozens of executive orders, draft executive orders, and other recommendations to Chris Wright, our Secretary of Energy, and to Doug Burgum, so that what I can say, I don't like to use the term winning, it's too slanted, but they're reading these things.
Good.
And they've implemented, where we've seen the most action is on the East Coast,
Yes.
where they had around a dozen offshore wind facilities who rely on these battery plants. And about a dozen of these facilities have been at least put on hold.
Good,
and
yes.
may be uprooted entirely. So there have been major actions that have emanated from the present administration that is taking this seriously.
Fantastic. That's really, really good news.
After everything we've heard today, the explosion, the toxins, the fast tracking of these dangerous battery facilities through AB 205, and the politicians that care more about money than community, one thing is clear: Californians deserve better. We deserve leaders who care about our safety. That's why this conversation matters. Thank you so much for tuning in to California Screamin'.